Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Back in the USSR here on 93.3 FM CFRU. And one of the things the thing I really want to talk about tonight is something which I haven't actually dealt with that much in the last while yet. It's been, just exploding all over the media and, constant attention being paid to this. And of course, I'm talking about the conflict which is going on in Korea right now. So to talk about this very important subject, I have Jason Unruh of Maoist Rebel News with me on the phone. And Jason, you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So, Jason, you've really been following this really, really big time on your show, Maoist Rebel News, for quite some time now. And just the kind of... Because, of course, all we hear about in the mainstream media is the constant demonization of North Korea. And of course, I found, your reports very, very helpful in terms of cutting through that, as I have for quite some time. So, just in terms of how... jumping right into it, looking at the origin of the present crisis... As we see it seems to be a matter of U.S. escalation, doesn't it?
Say that last part again.
It seems to be a matter of the U.S. once again really being behind this whole escalation, really blaming it on North Korea.
Yeah, it's definitely that. Certainly, I think this really stems from the satellite launch, which they had said over and over and over again was a cover for a missile test. Mm-hmm. But North Korea took they did the brave thing. They let the entire world's media walk in and inspect, the satellite, to inspect the rocket, and let everybody come in, everybody look at it, launched it into space. There is now a North Korean satellite in space, but it's still a missile test.
Yeah, and of course we've been hearing nothing about considering that entire thing, that was last November, I believe. And the entire time in the Western media, even though the North Koreans were very clearly letting in these, all manner of representatives and stuff, they still say it's a missile test. So, and there, of course, were UN sanctions based on that satellite launch, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, the sanctions were based on a violation of an agreement, which the launch did not violate. That was what catalyzed the whole thing. That's what they're basing the sanctions on, that they have violated the agreement on missile tests. But there was no missile test. We saw that it was launching a satellite into space.
Mm-hmm. So, so it seems like once again we have the United States kind of basically trying to batch one of these few last socialist holdouts, you could say, socialist countries in the world, and trying to really impose its will on this country. Of course, is right on China's border, and of course provides a there's certain strategic reasons behind why the United States is doing this.
Yeah, of course, there's all kinds of interests. North Korea is practically the only state in the world that's basically saying "F you." We are not going to be controlled in any way, shape, or form, and are willing to go to any extreme in order to maintain that independence. But North Korea itself has tremendous benefits to anybody who could get their hands on it. It was recently reported, I believe it was earlier this year, that surveys found there's about $6 trillion worth of rare earth metals in the country within the mountains. And that would be extremely valuable. Not to mention, if the U.S. was to get a hold of North Korea, they would have literally military bases on the border with China. And that's something China can absolutely not accept.
Mm-hmm. So, and it's very, very interesting to see that how we could kind of get to this stage where, there's various pundits even talking about nuclear war over this particular issue. Because, as I understand it, even in the during the 1990s, there was a major agreement between the United States and North Korea that there was going to be some sort of reciprocity. They were going to get what was it? Maybe a light water nuclear reactor or something like that to replace the one it already has, and there were security guarantees and all kinds of stuff to prevent the North Korea from going nuclear. And from what I can tell, the U.S. was the one that tore up that agreement. Is that the case?
Yeah, basically they just never lived up to their end of the agreement.
Mm-hmm.
It was just basically, okay, we got what we wanted, screw you.
Yeah, because that was going on, that was the Clinton administration, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was Clinton, and largely had to do with talks with Madeleine Albright,
mm-hmm.
who I believe now is retired, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I believe she is. But of course, she was, of course, the one who said that the sanctions that were killing millions of people in Iraq were worth it, so definitely not someone to be celebrated. But, yeah, so in the... And of course, North Korea being named as soon as George Bush takes power, it basically names him as the part of the Axis of Evil.
Yeah, the Axis of Evil was like one of the biggest jokes. Listing Iran as the Axis of Evil was silly because it has very limited ability to do anything offensively, and then to list Cuba, which has no offensive ability whatsoever,
yeah,
was just ridiculous.
Yeah, but of course, going into this this whole thing, really to the bottom of this, which you never really hear talked about in the mainstream media whatsoever, is the history of this entire dispute, the entire conflict on the Korean Peninsula, and I believe seeing the Korea for the thousands of years before, I think 1945 was a unified country, and now it's one of the most heavily militarized and divided places in the world. So maybe talk a little bit about the history of the Korean Peninsula and how we really got to this point.
Well, I don't really know much about the feudal area, or at least the end of the kingdoms. Relatively, the two forces came into Korea when it came to the end. That was communism and it was capitalism, or more specifically, the U.S. brand of capitalism. And it has to do largely with the idea of a unified Korea. As long as one is socialist and one is capitalist, there will not be a unified Korea. It's just not going to happen. One has to win out over the other. One has to transform into the dialectic. It just has to take its course.
Yeah.
There's not going to be, one, like I said, one has to transform into the other. And until that happens, there will never be a unified Korea. This is completely different interest and independent North Korea. Although I was like how they claimed that it was just a satellite state of the Soviet Union. The only reason there was a North Korea is because the USSR was forcing it. So where's it been? Then why is it still there?
Yeah, exactly. This is 20 years after the fall of the Soviet Union, and that's still enduring.
If that was the only reason it was there, why is it still there? Because it's independent, and I would say that the DPRK is probably more independent than any country in the world.
Yeah. Well, certainly pursuing a very independent foreign policy.
Yes, and unfortunately, given the global imperialist system, that comes at a very heavy price.
Yeah, because it seems like always North Korea is this kind of island in, say a socialist island in a capitalist sea, you might almost call it.
Yeah, you could say that.
Because in terms of the origins of the Korean War, though, of course, you said the war that really split, saw this kind of permanent militarization of the Korean Peninsula, and I believe that it was Japan that colonized North Korea, say around 1900, I think it was.
Yes.
And colonized Korea, a long and very, very brutal occupation, which I believe Kim Il-sung, who of course was the first leader of North Korea, was intimately involved in resisting that occupation.
Yes.
Yeah, he was. And so, of course, if I remember correctly, was it then Russia, which of course had invaded northern China to defeat the Japanese towards the end of at the beginning of 1945, and the United States basically intervened in South Korea to prevent it from going, falling to the Soviets.
Yes.
That is what actually happened.
Yeah, there was a struggle afterwards between the North and the South, and the North was going to win.
But of course, how did that kick off? I mean, what was the instigating force? Because we hear in a lot of the mainstream, say, history textbooks and stuff, that was the North Korean just unilaterally invading the South in what was it, 1940? Was it 49 or 1950?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact year, but you had these two completely opposing forces. I mean, to say that either one is responsible, I don't really think makes much sense. They were going to go to war no matter what. It was like the moment of World War I. All the empires had reached the end of their borders, and for them to expand any further, they were going to have to go to war with each other. Nobody was really more guilty than anyone else. It was just a symptom of the conflict that existed. Because these countries were in contradiction, they were going to go to war no matter what. And when you have two completely diametrically opposed forces, socialism and capitalism,
Yeah.
one has to win out over the other. To say that it's really anyone's fault is not really, I think, a valid criticism. A better criticism would be to say whether or not it was the U.S. The U.S. had the right, the UN had the right to go in and stop the North from finding the country.
Yeah, because of course in this situation, like at this time, I believe South Korea was a right-wing military dictatorship at this time, wasn't it?
Yes.
And it was until, I believe, the end of the Cold War.
Yes, it was. They carried out quite a few massacres.
Like of their own people.
Yes, and not even actually against North Koreans, like actually against South Koreans.
Like they accused them of collaborating with the North or being communists, that sort of thing.
It's not any different than what it is today. We only suspect you of something, and that's enough.
Because I believe because this legacy, I believe, is still in place. Because I think I heard I think it was Press TV the other day, the current president of South Korea is in fact the daughter of a long-standing South Korean dictator, from the Cold War era. And of course, she's one of the most bellicose anti-North Korean leaders I think they've had in a long time. Yeah, this is what I heard. So,
yeah, he was a pretty bad dictator, and his kid's running now.
Yeah,
everybody's just completely forgotten about what happened. What?
Yeah, just the fact that was brought up is what? She's the one in charge now. And should we really be surprised? The kind of, the fact that everything is blowing up now, considering who's in power.
I don't think so. I don't think it really matters. It's to say that it's either her or Lee Myung-bak or the liberal before him. I mean, obviously, it's one of those things where if a conservative is in power, it is obviously going to be worse. It's like saying the Liberal Party here defends people's rights, where the Conservative Party doesn't. Well, in fact, they both are. They're both a threat to people's rights. It's just one of them looks like it is, and one looks like it is, when they really are, both are. So I don't think a recent acceleration may be because of that.
Yeah.
But in the overall scheme, I don't see it as making much of a difference because those hostilities would have been there anyway. They're just worse than they would have been. Yeah,
because of course we have the class powers in control in South Korea, who have their own agenda.
Yeah.
Systemic agenda.
Yeah. Every country has its own divisions within the ruling class itself, and it's just a matter of which set of interests is going to win out over another. And they're just the interests that tend to ally more with the right-wing conservative parties they have more power right now.
Yeah, because one of the things we constantly hear in the media how South Korea is supposedly this beacon of democracy and this. Was it the 12th largest economy in the world or something like that? And yet, it exploits its workers at a frightening degree. And I think it was the highest rate of suicide possibly in the world. This is South Korea.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the rate of exploitation is insanely high. One good example of this is actually the show The Simpsons. The cartoon. It's made in Korea.
In terms of what, the animation?
Yeah, the animation, the actual day-to-day animation is actually done by a company called Rough Draft Korea.
And this is done in a factory kind of setting, people are doing this animation?
Yeah, it's done in an assembly line kind of a setting.
Wow.
And that's
I did not know that.
No, if you actually watch the credits for the show, it'll say Rough Draft Korea. If I'm correct, this also goes for Futurama and a couple other shows that were also by Matt Groening.
By the same guy.
Yeah. In fact, The Simpsons actually made a joke about it one time. They made a joke about it being made in Korea once. I can't remember what the joke was.
In some context, they said that.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, I'd say that says a lot. Because recently I was going through this teaching English overseas training, right? And one of the top destination is South Korea because I guess they want, because they want to train, you say, the future generation of elites in the English language, and it seems that's one of their major things they want to do in order to integrate into the global economy, so to speak.
I would say that that's not really that much of a symptom of imperialism, specifically against Korea itself, because North Korea puts a great deal of emphasis on teaching people English.
Really?
There's actually a lot done to make the country actually bilingual, and that it can speak English and Korean, particularly when it relates to medical and technological stuff, particularly in those fields of education, because the vast majority of works are published in English.
Mm-hmm. So,
I mean, when this scientific stuff gets published, it's going to be published in regardless of where the country, what country publishes it, it's going to be in their native language, and it's going to be in English.
Mm-hmm.
So because all these things are all being published in English as well, what's the point of learning all these other languages to get a hold of these scientific papers? You just teach English.
Yeah. So where would they get their English teachers from? Do you know that?
The DPRK?
Yeah.
There's not many foreign English teachers. A lot of them is just domestic. They've actually, that's one of the great ironies of being anti-imperialist, is that in the end you still had to learn the colonizer's language anyway, because the colonizer's language was so predominant within the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I had absolutely no clue about that whole situation there. Because I know, going back to the whole factor of Korean reunification, something like 91% of South Koreans, or some insane number, actually wants this, and it's a pretty unbelievable number. I think even in on both sides of the border. But of course, the international system itself is totally opposed to that entire idea.
Yeah,
you have, I think it was Japan that does not want a unified Korea because they see it as an economic competitor. The U.S., of course, wants to maintain its military control in South Korea, 40,000 troops or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I guess a unified Korea, of course, would make that redundant. And I think China, of course, has interest in this as well. But just even thinking about that, because the whole concept of reunification, the way it's usually talked about, is okay, just, North Korea just accepting the Southern system and just integrating into South Korea. Where it's well, they would never do that. Why would they ever want to do that? Especially now they're a nuclear-armed state. And they're supposed to assimilate into this system, which we just talked about is terribly exploitative and goes against everything the North has traditionally stood for. It just does not seem rational at all. There would have to be immense dialogue, respectful, and I just don't see that coming.
No, it's because the U.S. really doesn't want it. I mean, it's very easy to point to the fact that the vast majority of people in both the North and the South do want reunification. There's no question of that. They want it. They don't really like their country being divided, no more than any other country would really want to be divided like that. But it's not just a simple matter of what people want.
Yeah.
It's more complicated. It's not just, you can't just want it and then make it exist. It's tremendously more complicated than that. You have two competing political and economic systems, which is a large part of that division. So it's not a matter of just wanting it. There really is huge competing forces, and a unified Korea would be extremely powerful, assuming that it wasn't a colony of somebody else.
Yeah.
North Korea has a tremendous amount of industrialization, far more than people realize. A lot of it gives you usually don't see these things. They just say, oh, look, here's this prison camp on a satellite photo. Oh, here's this farm in the middle of nowhere. There's actually an extraordinary amount of industrialization that actually takes place, and a lot of it was recently renewed, an acceleration of industrialization under Kim Jong-un. That was one of the things that when he came in, that he said, okay, we need to go into a second round of industrialization. And that's why you had all these things popping up now. We got all these new computers, flat screen monitors, upgrades in satellite technology. There's been a massive burst in that once again. I mean, in terms of technological development, they've actually exploded since he came into power. And that's what's given him a lot of credibility. I mean, it's not a straight dictatorship where, he has unquestionable authority or anything like that, because he himself barely managed to stay in power when they voted on whether or not he would be the head of the Korean Workers' Party. I mean, a lot of people obviously took him, one, because he has a really good education, and two, he has the family name.
Right.
I mean, come on, they do the same thing here. I mean, would anybody have cared anything about George Bush if he wasn't his father's son?
His father's son.
Would Justin Trudeau be anywhere near the head of the Liberal Party right now if he was not Pierre Trudeau's son?
Yeah, it's like, what's in a name, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Yeah, because you don't hear anything about, like, say, North Korean development or anything like that. You just hear it's like this somehow poor, backward country. But they sometimes will let slip that it's one of the most literate countries in the world. And stuff. It's like, well, how does that square with your general picture of an impoverished, third world backwater?
Yeah, it's just one of those things that is really important for life, but people generally just don't pay attention to it. What is it? Venezuela, Cuba, and North Korea have the highest literacy rates in the world, and the country with the highest literacy rate in Africa is, ironically, Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe is. I'm always reminded of the internet meme, from where is the picture of. I keep forgetting his name. He's on the phone. He says, "I don't know who you are. I'm going to find you, and I'm going to kill you."
Okay.
Picture Robert Mugabe on the phone, and it says, "Hey, economy, I don't know how you work, but I am going to find you, and I am going to kill you." But then again, the problems in Zimbabwe are, a whole different matter completely.
Well, that's in Africa.
Yeah,
in general.
Despite all their difficulties they have, they still have the highest literacy rate in Africa, which is actually even higher than Libya under Gaddafi, which is
wow,
really something in itself.
Yeah. It's pretty incredible, and of course, seeing that, I believe North Korea, in fact, was far more developed than South Korea for at least the vast majority of its history.
Up until about the 80s, it was actually far ahead.
Yeah, seeing that, South Korea is this kind of largely an impoverished right-wing dictatorship ruled by a deeply corrupt government.
Which is actually ironic because the state there ran a lot of things too.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, they always say, well, if the government does it, it'll ruin it. Yet we literally had, the state running things on both sides. The North obviously had the state running more than things in the South, but the development in the South the development in the North actually took off better because it went by a national plan, and it was an extremely successful plan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, basically, it went from a completely bombed out, flat land to, a tremendous industrialized position, given the conditions it actually faced.
Yeah, because it was too. I mean, I was going to bring that up, the fact that. The United States, I believe, dropped more bombs on North Korea than it did on Japan and Germany combined in the Second World War.
Yep.
Yeah. and somebody made it was Douglas MacArthur, one of these imperialist generals serving the United States, saying there's no way Pyongyang would ever rise from the ashes again. It's been bombed back to the Stone Age. There's no way. And yet within a matter of a few years, it's being rebuilt because they had effective planning and they had the expertise and all this sort of stuff, and they actually just built it all up in a remarkable short period of time.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can actually accomplish when when you don't have competing groups of rich people trying to cut each other down for their own benefit.
Mm-hmm. And so you say and this is largely because of the system that the North Koreans had in place. They were able to kind of make these kind of rapid advancements, and I guess that would extend to staying afloat after the collapse of the Soviet Union, its major trading partner. I guess Cuba underwent a kind of a similar period where it was just undergoing all kinds of disasters. This is in the 90s, right?
Yeah, in Cuba it was called the Special Period.
Yeah.
I mean, they outright said, okay, look, things are going to get really, really bad because we've lost our main trading partner. But Castro went out and he said straight up, things are going to get bad, but we promise you we will never cut healthcare and we will never cut education. Mm-hmm. Because he said those were the two fundamental things for human life, and they never did. Yeah.
And so, of course, because I guess what you hear in the media is you hear about these major disasters like floods and famines and all this stuff happening in the 1990s, and then they kind of insinuate that North Korea never recovered.
Yeah, that's not true. I mean, there obviously was a famine.
Yeah,
there's no denying that. They don't deny that either. They have their own. It's a Korean word. I can't remember it, which describes that period. I think it was called the I remember what it was. It was called the Arduous March, which is not to be
Right.
confused with the Long March.
Which China, right?
Yeah. It was basically saying, remembering how bad things were, and that they still came out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were in the worst position. The Soviet Union was gone, and the Eastern Bloc was gone.
Yeah.
They lost about 78% of their trade, which is absolutely devastating. If that were to happen to this country or the United States, particularly with the fact that it has a $38.5 billion trade deficit,
Yep.
it would destroy us like practically overnight.
Well, yeah, that's massive. I mean, I think it says something to the cohesion of that particular society that can actually endure that.
Yeah, that's a literal impossibility for our society to survive. And a heat wave swept through and caused these damages, because I don't see what the point, how losing the trade with the Soviet Union would have actually caused a famine, because the Soviet Union didn't determine whether or not crops grew.
Mm-hmm.
It was a heat wave that struck North Korea, which bore the brunt of it. China got it a bit, and South Korea got it a bit.
Yeah.
By this time, China was already wealthy enough that it just bought like incredible amounts of extra food from Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
So that it was fine. And South Korea just got whatever it could possibly want from the United States. And the Soviet Union gave like $500,000 to North Korea. That's like nothing.
Like, yeah, for this.
That's like pocket change.
Yeah.
So they basically had to take this on by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They did the best they could. And again, there's this perception that this is still going on to this day. That's not true. There is malnourishment. There is people are not eating enough food, but there is not starvation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it seems like this is another one of these famine mythologies that I think we talked about this before in our last interview when we were talking about what happened in the say the Great Leap Forward famine, or the famine in the USSR in the early 1930s, and how both of these events were kind of just used to just bash communism in general, when of course they were caused by the weather.
Yeah.
Like overwhelmingly, that was the reason for it. In both cases, there was major relief efforts and all this sort of things. People were not deliberately caused to starve to death.
Yeah, even some more information came out about the famine in China. The famine in China, the death rate during the famine was actually less than it would have been during the regular famines that occurred.
Really?
Which means even if if Mao had never come to power, the famine still would have been worse.
Well, yeah, because the rural infrastructure was just not set up to handle that sort of thing in the feudal period, like at all.
No, it didn't. It didn't even exist.
Yeah, like that's of course traditionally why you had the like so many famines and so bad, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And these famines still happen today in capitalist countries, but that doesn't count.
Yeah. Because actually, this is a bit of a side note, but I actually did read Mo Bo Gao's Battle for China's Pass. I think that was the reason why I did that is because you brought that up in the last interview we did, and it's really amazing. Like just reading about the kind of gains that were made under the Cultural Revolution, which I had no idea about before in China, and this built up the rural infrastructure. There was never like a major famine after this. Rural industry was just went through the roof. I mean, everybody was finally there's access to healthcare, access to education in the countryside. Like it's unbelievable, and these things were gradually demolished under Deng Xiaoping.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Like the one-child policy is a tremendous example. There was a restriction of families under revolutionary China, but their solution was, hey, here's abortions that you can get,
yeah,
and here's either subsidized or free birth control.
Yeah,
they incentivized and created programs to help prevent a further expansion of the population. Whereas under capitalism, under Deng Xiaoping, when the one-child policy came into effect, it was punishing people for having an extra child.
Right. So, like, totally different.
It was completely different.
Yeah.
But to this day, of course, China still, communism is still blamed for what capitalism actually did.
Yeah. Like, this is capitalism coming in and introducing these kind of policies, like in the 1980s.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And like it was like 1981 or something like that when the one-child policy came in. I think it was somewhere around there.
Yeah, and it was also a thing that I brought up too about gun control in China. Yeah, it came in about 1981. Yeah, Mao died in 76.
Yeah, because before then you had the, just about every community was armed, right? Like had the militias and all that kind of stuff in the Cultural Revolution.
People walked around factories with guns on them.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know where you get this idea Mao took the guns away.
Oh, yeah, we were talking about that before.
Yeah, to quote Alex Jones. I mean, if you actually had that today, say you had a union, say if you had, the union for the people who offload, I forget the name of the union, from planes and stuff.
Yep.
Imagine if all those guys were walking around with guns on them.
Yeah.
Imagine you went to, a protest for an OPSU walkout, and they're all standing there with handguns.
And they're all standing there with handguns or like AK-47s or something, right?
Yeah, imagine that. Imagine what would have happened.
Yeah, it kind of changes the dynamic a little bit. But yeah, getting back to North Korea, though, I mean, once again, they have a very, I guess it's totally understandable given the kind of pressure they've experienced. Like this whole, was it the Army First policy, which they have?
Songon.
Yeah. So maybe if you just want to maybe briefly describe what that's all about.
Okay, when Kim Il-sung ran things, they had the Juche policy, which was self-reliance.
Right.
Basically, he was no dummy, and he knew that they were going to have to take this alone. I believe he saw the Sino-Soviet split coming.
Right.
And their whole thing was like, okay, look, we either have to ally with China or we have to ally with the Soviet Union. Well, he said, well, screw that. We can't afford to take one side or the other. So they said, okay, now we've got Juche.
Yeah.
And Juche is a good idea. That's the thing. It played a double role of, it was a plan to industrialize, and it was to avoid that whole conflict to begin with, as much as anybody, within the international commerce community could. And that served them well, up until, a certain point. Then Kim Jong-il came in, and they had the military first policy of, okay, we've gone relatively as far as we can go without a huge amount of international trade, and the pressure's back on us. They're coming at us with this, they're coming at us with that. So
yeah,
you could make the argument that it's a kind of a Keynesian thing, where it's investing in the country itself through the military.
Right.
But basically, it was like, the idea was that after they've gone through all of this, they're coming at any moment. Like the Second Korean War is going to come soon. Of course, that didn't materialize, but the thought was at the time that could happen at any moment. When Kim Il-sung died, they thought, okay, this is it. This is when we can jump on them.
Yeah. So they're saying, like, okay, we have to keep our military, like, basically just prep for battle, like, at the slightest, like, provocation. We have to keep ourselves ready.
Yeah, we
constantly
have to be ready to go at any moment.
Yeah, and they're still maintaining that footing right now.
Yes.
Which is unsurprising, seeing the the war games that are going on in South Korea. They're still going on right now, right? Like for 2 months or something.
Yes.
Yeah, and this is the United States and South Korea, and basically right on North Korea's doorstep, like vast nuclear weapons armed planes and basically simulated invasions and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, it's like imagine opening the front door to your house, and there's all your neighbors practicing killing you. Right,
to kill you.
The road from your house.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can imagine that would really piss you off.
Well, yeah. Make me a little bit uneasy, to say the least. And we're really surprised that North Korea wants to keep its nuclear arsenal under conditions like this.
Of course not. They'd be fools to give it up.
Yeah.
I mean, as a friend of mine who goes to the University of Concordia actually pointed out, it's not having nuclear weapons isn't just, a rational plan for defense, where you can just say, like, look at everybody who was nuclear armed. The United States didn't touch them. Except, of course, for Cuba, but there's a lot of criticisms that could be made in that situation.
Yeah.
But they know that if they have nuclear arms, that's the point where nobody's really going to want to touch them. But I mean, there's also an economic rationality behind it. Keeping a military armed, fully stocked and ready to go is very, very expensive.
Yeah.
And a single nuclear weapon is actually cheaper.
Yeah.
It's actually a more cost-effective measure of defense. I mean, obviously, it can't actually, take the place of a standing military inside the country, but it is more cost-effective overall.
Yeah. And when did the North Koreans actually make the decision to, okay, now we're going to develop nuclear warheads?
I mean, it was always there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm imagining that even there since day one, it was always there. It was only a matter of developing to a point where they can afford to do that, to where they had the knowledge and the technical capability. The technical capability being the major block at this point. I mean, that would have always been, but yeah, technical know-how is a major obstacle.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe that they've had it always in their sight.
Right.
And they've made concessions here or there. And while they have made those concessions, I don't doubt for a second that the research continued.
Yeah.
Because although you can get some concessions now, in the long run, you're still dead if you don't have them.
Mm-hmm. So it's a realistic survival calculus, basically.
Mm-hmm.
These guys have. And obviously, there's been major technical process. I mean, the fact that they've been able to develop rocketry to the extent they can put a satellite in space and develop these very, very technically complex projects, even at a time when they're under severe sanctions. I think that should tell us something about the kind of society we're dealing with here.
Yeah, and they think about the fact that they got into space before South Korea did.
Yeah,
and South Korea got all this space expertise and assistance from the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And they still managed to do it.
And South Korea still has not put a satellite into space or done anything like that.
They have done it. They did it, I believe, a week or 2 weeks after North Korea did.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God. It's like,
I mean, this was like the point of, okay, if they're so economically backward and they're stupid or whatnot, and they get into space and we don't,
mm-hmm.
that makes us look really bad.
Yeah.
Of course, with the North Korean launch having taken place, it didn't really hit the news all that much that South Korea had just done it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people had already assumed that it had already been done, that South Korea had already gotten a satellite into space, but it actually hadn't.
Mm-hmm. So, just in terms of how North Korea manages to maintain itself in this sort of capacity, I mean, you hear a lot about its relationship with China, but I don't that's not enough to really maintain where it's at right now. It does have trade relations with other countries, say in the third world, right?
Yeah, they're starting to strike a new deal for oil from Iran.
Right.
Iran had its sanctions placed again. No, we're not going to buy your fuel, so screw you. And they're like, okay, well, we need a customer for this. Who needs oil? Well, North Korea has sanctions against it for oil.
Yeah.
So, basically, the U.S. just gave them that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And the relationship between North Korea and China can be complicated.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, China has what it wants. China likes the way they are because it's beneficial to them. The Chinese can export some of its manufacturing to North Korea and have it done cheaper, the same way the U.S. sends manufacturing to China. China is almost the exclusive purchaser of all the rare earth metals and stuff that comes out of the DPRK.
Yep.
The U.S. comes over, it takes over, that's gone.
Yeah, and of course that means American troops right on China's border as well.
Yeah. So China has a definite vested interest in keeping a war from happening. They're actually very happy with the way things are now. They want them to stay the same.
Right.
Which is why they said, we won't tolerate anybody attacking anybody, over the won't tolerate the U.S. and North Korea going to war, because they literally don't want it to happen.
Right.
They have things the way they are that's beneficial to them.
Mm-hmm.
Is that necessarily the best thing for North Korea? Probably not. But, China has its own interests, and it just so happens that in this particular situation, it's convenient to North Korea.
Yeah. Because one of the things I was going to bring up, the fact that, and this might, of course, hinge on why, one of the reasons why the United States is so hostile to North Korea in the first place. I believe that was that was the place where the United States suffered its last major battlefield defeat.
Yes.
In the hands of, I believe it was Chinese and North Koreans, effectively destroyed pretty much an entire U.S. Army.
Yeah, I mean, aside from Vietnam, of course, but in terms of large-scale regular warfare.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah, it was one of those situations where they just they couldn't win. when you're fighting for your home, you're always going to be fighting harder than when you're trying to occupy somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
It always means that different. And it's hard to say whether or not they perceive it as a loss because, well, they just say it wasn't.
Yeah.
Even though literally it was. It's like when they declared that the War of 1812 wasn't a loss for the U.S., but it was. Like, I don't get that. Like, I've seen that in U.S. textbooks. It's like, we attacked, didn't take over, we won.
And they won.
What?
Yeah.
Like, how do you work that?
It's like, what is that? How? But let me see. Like, I just wanted to, like, in your estimation, because of course we've seen like so many socialist countries kind of go belly up, and their elites making deals and adopting capitalism and this sort of thing in the aftermath of, say, 1989. So why would you, in your estimation, would North Korea not go that way? Why would it maintain itself?
I think it has a lot to do with the fact that they are just so bloody stubborn. They just do not want to sell out. They just do not want to give up.
Mm.
The national cohesion there is incredibly strong, and to them, independence is more important than death. I mean, what's the U.S. saying in New Hampshire? It's on their license plates. Give me liberty.
Give me liberty, give me death. Right?
They live that. They live that. They want their independence, or they will die.
Yeah, like that's basically the spirit that exists there. Yeah, because what it actually reminds me of is the fact that there's so few socialist countries in the world today, and they almost remind me of those few countries in the 19th century that resisted colonization. Like, in particular, I'm thinking of Ethiopia. That was one of the few places that actually inflicted a major defeat on, I believe it was Italy, when they tried to colonize it, and they actually resisted all attempts. It's one of the few examples of that. And that kind of reminds me of say, places like North Korea, which are still holding out and very doggedly maintaining the Marxist-Leninist, kind of... It's really become part of their identity.
Yes.
And they're fighting for this.
They're just... It's part of their identity. It's not going to go away.
Yeah. Because how would you compare that to, say, Cuba? Like, in how it's kind of maintained itself? Cuba
has a different set of conditions, a different set of material conditions surrounding its situation. For one, you can't portray Cuba as a military threat to anyone.
Yeah,
it's just not possible. I believe the famous line was they were telling I can't remember his name in Mexico all those years ago, to say that Cuba was an imminent threat, and he said, if we do that, then millions of Mexicans will die laughing.
Yeah, they'll laugh at us.
It just won't work. It's very hard. It has a lot to do with the imagery around it. Cuba, it doesn't have it has a different, what's the word I'm looking for? Connotation to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sunny, bright place. It's the Caribbean, and Che's awesome, and everybody loves him, and
yeah, the symbolism around it, and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
yeah.
Whereas North Korea has a very different symbolism around it.
Mm-hmm. Because I've noticed that just because the certainly you get like the various sectors on the left who are very hostile in general to communism, but they make an exception for Cuba. That seems to be the general rule. Like if you're talking like Noam Chomsky or somebody like that.
Cuba has the image of we want to live in peace. Please stop doing what you're doing to us.
Yeah,
we're trying to live in peace. And North Korea is like, if you don't back off, we're going to effing kill you. I mean, they come out very militaristically, like screw you. We are going to do what we want. Whereas Cuba often has more of an air of a victim around it. I mean, I'm not saying that they're not a victim. They are definitely a victim of imperialism, but they appear to be a victim to everybody else, whereas North Korea isn't seen as a victim of U.S. aggression.
Right. Because Cuba seems to it certainly has benefited in recent years because the increasing integration of Latin America and that entire region, of course, has been victimized by U.S. imperialism for 200 years and seems to be kind of unifying in a way that really integrates Cuba and increasingly shuts the United States out. So it's almost like this international alliance system is kind of keeping Cuba in kind of afloat in a way that, say, North Korea can't rely on.
Yeah, because it does have a homogeny with the rest of Latin America that the Asian countries don't share.
Yeah.
The relationship between Venezuela and Cuba has been of an astronomical benefit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just been a godsend for Cuba to have this relationship, whereas North Korea is it's not as alone as people think it is.
Mm-hmm.
There is an anti-imperialist bloc, although however small. Iran, Syria, North Korea, and probably some other ones.
Mm-hmm. They're kind of like that. They're basically standing up. The so-called rogue states, so to speak.
Yeah.
You know,
so-called rogue states.
Yeah, in U.S. foreign policy jargon. Yeah, because I mean they've almost been forced to come together like by default, just given the immense amount of pressure placed on them.
Yeah, I noted recently that Iran has a largely Islamic society.
Yeah,
Islamic influence laws, but it is still fairly secular, given the fact that it's in the Middle East, and whereas North Korea has a straight out, completely secular, atheist government, and yet they're still cooperating.
Yeah, and I guess they weren't before the Axis of Evil speech. I mean, I don't think there was really any cooperation whatsoever. But it seems like after that period of time now, it's like because all this pressure on us, well, who else are we going to trade with?
Yeah.
Except for this other guy who are kind of in the same shoes as I am. Even though they have a very different system.
They might as well have just made them shake hands. You make this list. Okay, here's all the people we're going to go after. Well, you might as well just introduce each other on the spot.
Yeah, like here's a new. Yeah, basically that basically is going to become an alliance by default because there's no other way it can be.
Exactly.
Yeah, in terms of survival. So, really, I know this is really, really hard to do, but like how would you say that this current dispute is gonna turn out? Like, what are your projections for say this year about like what's going to happen?
Actually, I don't think there's going to be a war. Because China's already sent military ships into the waters between the two countries.
Yeah, like the Yellow Sea.
Officially, they're denying it. I don't know why, but the photos are there, the reports are there.
Yeah,
like, we know it's there. Like, I don't know what's the point of saying it's not. China has things the way they want it, and any destabilization of North Korea, particularly in the hands of imperialist interests, is extremely bad for them. I think that if it was to accelerate further, China would most likely place a no-fly zone, sort of around the country. If anybody tries to fly in and out without their permission, they're going to shoot them down.
Yeah, like that's
if
red line.
North Korean bombers take off, they're going to get shot down. Or if U.S. warplanes fly in, they're going to shoot them down. Mm-hmm. Because they don't want the war to happen. They don't need North Korea to fall. They need it to stay the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a vested interest in keeping it that way. And if North Korea was to fall to U.S. hands, then China just could not allow that. I mean, even if there was an invasion, China would rush in to make sure that their interests were defended. China doesn't particularly want to go to war with the United States, and the United States doesn't particularly want to go to war with China. But again, we have the competing opposing interests, and in the course of the dialectic, they're going to go up against each other.
Right.
And that out of necessity is going to force them to go at each other.
And that was pretty much the same situation that led to China's involvement in the Korean War in the first place.
I would say that one was largely solidarity as well, because they wanted that solidarity too. Of course, it was definitely in their interest, and they had complete total interest that they had to keep. But it wasn't the same thing as it is now. There, they had an interest in keeping a free, independent North Korea, as opposed to now, where they need them as a source of minerals and labor.
Mm-hmm. So, because back then, I believe it was basically a volunteer force that went into Korea.
It was.
The Chinese force.
They called on for internationalist volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it was one of Mao's sons who actually died in that war.
Yeah. Because that was it was hundreds of thousands of Chinese who went.
It was across the Yellow River.
The Yalu River, I think it was. That's the one that's on the border of Korea and China, right?
Yeah, it was 300,000 Chinese troops made it across the border of the Yellow River, and U.S. intelligence had no record of it happening.
And I guess that was what led to the major, which I believe happened from a surprise attack, which led to the destruction of much of an American army, and it's basically routing.
Yeah.
And
yeah. But that was always the big thing. They got 300,000 troops across that river, and the U.S. had no record of it ever happening.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they had no idea that it was there, which I always thought was pretty amazing.
Well, yeah, that is pretty
A lot
amazing.
of troops to move without being noticed.
Yeah. But certainly, because you have, you do actually have contact in the North Korean government.
Yes, I do. I'm in contact with the foreign ministry.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I got some things that I have to finish up first and deal with, and then I've actually been invited to go.
Really? Wow. Well, certainly, if that does come to pass, like, we're definitely gonna have to talk about that after you return.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Wow.
A ton of videos while I'm there.
Yeah. Because that's absolutely unbelievable. I mean, it's one of these things I've actually wanted to do that as well. It's just it's quite it's rather hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Certainly, especially at a time like this.
I'm being invited. They're inviting me to go, where they're offering to pay for the trip and everything.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. It's like, how do you do that? Do you like pretty much have to go through China, or is that about the only way you can really get there?
Yeah. The North Korean airline doesn't go very far, and they're like, oh, look how poor it is. Well, no, not really, when you consider a lot of the countries around it will shoot their planes down if they do.
Yeah.
China, Russia, and they do have flights to, I believe it's Thailand.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
So either one of those places I'll have to go to first, probably China.
Mm-hmm. Well, so that's going to be absolutely amazing, though. I'm getting to see this firsthand, because I know I was like seeing like the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninists had a whole delegation that went there a few years back and like brought back a whole report on what happened and actually actual experiences they had in that country. And I guess they had pretty much had free reign. They pretty much could go wherever they wanted to. So they actually got to see the countryside firsthand, the cities, like basically anything they wanted. It's like, yeah. So I mean, I'd say, like, try to bring back some documentation. That's for sure. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that.
Yeah, I did manage. The foreign ministry did manage to give me a document that outlined civil law proceeding in North Korea.
Really?
Like how how trials and convictions and stuff like that works.
Mm-hmm. Because you did a video one time, I think, on marijuana laws or something like that in North Korea?
Yes.
It was quite interesting.
Yeah, their general attitude is like, if it doesn't affect your work, they don't care what you're doing.
Right. Which is
you could
pretty relaxed compared to us.
You could drink a lot as long as it didn't actually affect your work. Then, like, if you weren't stumbling down in the streets at 2:00 in the morning, as long as you weren't doing things like that, as long as it wasn't interfering with your job, they basically don't care.
Wow.
Like it's fairly common for farmers to make corn liquor.
Yeah.
I forget exactly what it is, but like distilling their own liquor, and it's like technically it's illegal, but they don't really enforce it that much.
Wow. So once again, all this stuff and I think this is the kind of, once again, we need to see the humanity of say the North Korean people. That's really what needs to be seen right now, because I mean, we really need to bust through so many of these myths. They're so destructive.
Yeah, one of the most common ones, common symbols of daily regular life is that one crossing the line with Joe Dresnok.
Yeah.
Where he's retired and he's sitting there with his friends, on the side of the river fishing, and they're just sitting there drinking, smoking, and eating the fish that they catch.
Yeah.
It's a very simple thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's there. Like, they don't do crazy parties and stuff like that. It's somebody's birthday, they go to somebody's house, they get hammered, they have a good time, and that's it.
Yeah.
It's not elaborate, huge things, but it's basically regular family stuff.
Yeah. And once again, yeah, because this is socialism, right?
Yeah.
This is what they do. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, it looks like we're about out of time now. But I mean, I want to thank you very much, Jason, for coming on. And once again, we got to do this again.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. So thank you very much.
Okay. See you later.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.
Okay, so that was Jason Unruh of Maoist Rebel News here on Back in the USSR talking about North Korea. So we're going to be back after this short break. So don't go anywhere.
Welcome to Bruce Lee's Wing Chun. Bruce Lee's Wing Chun was a little bit different than the traditional Wing Chun that he learned from Yip Man. He modified it a lot. It's a big topic, but I'm going to try to simplify it into some basic differences between Bruce Lee's Wing Chun and regular Wing Chun. So here we go. Here's Bruce Lee's 3 favorite trapping techniques. Let's show it to you right now. This first one, second one, okay, second one, the third one. Alright, or like this. Back fist. Right, so. Okay, so those are 3. Let me show you how to do them in slow motion. Alright, so the first one is starting with a hop to the back fist. Forces him to do this, right? Now, if his back fist pushes me over this way, I feel the energy going this way, and I'm going to go underneath with a lap and continue my back fist. It's a double back fist. So, double back fist, I feel the energy going this way, grab, and then back fist. Really slow now. 1, back fist, you push this way, this one comes underneath, grab, back fist. That's the first one. Second one, similar. You start with this again, but now his energy is kind of in the middle, but it's not all the way this way, it's a little bit on this way. So I'm going to bring this one up, and then trap it down this way, and then either his arm's back there, I don't have to really worry about it, but if his arm is here, then great. I get to pin it down to his hip, and now I'm open for a trap. So slow motion again, let's go 1, 2, this one comes up here, 3, and then you want to go 3 to pin it in like this. Drop it, see him, sink it down, okay? And then boom, like that, that's the second one. Third one is I start with my right lead, right? So I go for a punch, and he meets it, I feel that energy, I'm going to roll my elbow over, and boom, okay? So, boom, boom, that's a back fist, boom, so roll over, boom. Now if he blocks it, boom, I pull this one down and punch. If he misses that one, then I trap this one and continue on this way. So those are the 3 Bruce Lee's favorite trapping techniques. So cool. Alright, so if you studied your Bruce Lee history, you know that Bruce Lee only learned Lin Tao and Samkil. He never got the Beauty. Interesting, right? So he only learned half, or maybe even less than half, than the Wing Chun forms. Now, when he did Chi Sao, you notice that a lot of the traditional Chi Sao, they stand in this stance. Okay, it's a square stance, and they're a little bit backwards, and their head is upright like this. So they do Chi Sao like this. Okay, which is okay. A lot of people do like that. If you can make that work for you, then they're great. Now, Bruce Lee, when he went to the States, he started to meet people that are a lot bigger than him, right? Like I'm Asian, and I'm here in North America, and basically all the other people are bigger than me, other than the other Asians here. But pretty much, if all the other non-Asians are bigger than me. So that's what Bruce Lee encountered when he went to the States. Everybody's bigger. So what happened was they were stronger and heavier, and this didn't have any structure anymore because it was just too hard to put enough energy. So he modified it into a fencing or kickboxing stance with his right lead in front. And he opened up his back. Instead of making it like this, he opened up like his back. So it'll be like pushing a car. If you push a wall, if you push a car, it's going to be like this. You don't push a car like this. You won't push the car anywhere. So his philosophy was he needed more pressure to go against a bigger opponent. So he used the round back to connect to the arm and open it up a little bit. So instead of being a little bit tight elbow, he opened up his elbow a little bit. That's how he did it. A lot of people say, oh, that's not Wing Chun, that's not proper, but that's how he did it. I'm just showing you what he did. Okay, so, and the reason, like I said, is to put more pressure into the person, like this. Because I can push him a lot more, put a lot more pressure, and then that's his key, is to use the pressure in his Jeet Kune Do, right? Jeet Kune Do is way of the intercepting fist, which means he has to intercept and he has to make preemptive movements to force the other person to do something. So this is, he modified his Chi Sao to have that, to put this forward pressure. A lot of people say, oh, that's too much pressure. Well, it's not stupid pressure, it's smart pressure, because he's using all this stuff to do some really cool stuff, and some of the fastest Chi Sao that I've ever seen. Thanks for watching Bruce Lee's Wing Chun trapping techniques. I showed you 3 today. There's a lot more that we can show you and how Bruce Lee fought with his style of Wing Chun. So if you like this video, make sure you check out some of my other videos on this channel and subscribe to this channel to get cool, awesome lessons on martial arts.